Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. It has been a huge week for Microsoft this week, dropping news about the release date and price for its new Xbox devices, but that is not what I wanted to talk about today. Rather, I wanted to talk about Microsoft's big weapon in the next generation, and that is Game Pass. If you look at the conversations that are happening around the announcements this week, people are of course interested in the hardware and excited for it, but it really is Game Pass that is inspiring their enthusiasm. For anybody who hasn't been following along, Game Pass is a subscription service that works a little like Netflix or Spotify. You pay a monthly fee, and in exchange for that, you gain unlimited access to a wide range of games, and I do believe it is up over 100 at this point. Big news this week is that EA is adding its own catalogue to Game Pass, meaning that you also gain access to some of that publisher's absolutely lucrative library. The reason that I wanted to do this video is that people's response and overwhelming enthusiasm for Game Pass actually fascinates me. It fascinates me because it is going to be absolutely terrible for video games as an art form. Absolutely terrible. But because it means that people get their content cheap, they don't seem to care. They did care when it was DLC and microtransactions that were ruining the artistry of games, because those things cost money. But it has suddenly become very palatable when it is saving the consumer cash, which tends to imply to me that people never really cared about the artistry in video games. In fact, it honestly amazes me how easy it has been for Microsoft to play the market like this. It is destroying the art form, and we are thanking them for it. It's not like there isn't precedent here to show the impact of subscription services. Spotify has been around for a very long time now and is renowned for being destructive to the artists, just so some suits in Silicon Valley with no artistic talent whatsoever can make some cash from the artist's content. Some artists have benefited from Spotify, of course. The really big names do enjoy a lucrative business from the sheer number of plays that they get on their app. And indies do have an opportunity to leverage Spotify to reach a global audience much more quickly than traditional means, however limited that opportunity is in application. However, the bulk of music acts do sit in the middle, and they really suffer from this model, as they don't get anywhere near enough plays through the app to make their niche fan bases profitable for them. There's a really good article titled "Is Spotify Wiping Out the Music's Middle Class?", which I will link to in the video description here. It highlights how it's the capitalism model all over again. The tiny percentage of the really wealthy get even wealthier, the scrappy have to scrap even harder, and the vast majority of people suffer under this model, except for a tiny few elites who really do make a big profit from it. When applied to the arts, what this actually means is that the art form is forced to become much more mainstream in terms of the art that is created, and acts and musicians need to create shallow pop art in order just to survive. Anybody trying to be creative, transgressive, challenging, or different, in other words, anyone trying to be a genuine artist, is actively hurt for their efforts. The same goes for Netflix, exactly the same. If you are an independent filmmaker with an idea for a TV show or film that Netflix likes and wants to throw some money at you to make, then you've got it made. If you've got something that Netflix really wants, i.e. your film or TV show falls into Netflix's content strategy, then you've also got it made. If, however, you've created something creative, transgressive, challenging, or different, i.e. you've created something as an artist, then chances are that you are not going to get onto Netflix's platform. And because the distribution outlet, Netflix, has sucked so much of the global audience and spend on film into it, it suddenly becomes much harder to operate outside of the Netflix system. And that Netflix system, as we've just discussed, has no tolerance for anything but mainstream, safe entertainment. In other words, it suddenly becomes much harder to be an artist. You don't see Gaspar Noé's films on Netflix for a reason. They are adult-only films, they often have extreme levels of violence and sex in them, and they are incredibly important artistic films, but they're not on Netflix, simply because they don't fit in with Netflix's content strategy. Another example, Netflix has all of Studio Ghibli's films on it, and it certainly has the resources to get them all on there, but there's one exception: Grave of the Fireflies. Netflix could afford Grave of the Fireflies if Netflix really wanted that on the platform, but Grave of the Fireflies might make people sad if they watch it. Outside of America, regional film industries such as Australia are absolutely terrified of the impact that Netflix will have on them and their ability to produce anything, as DVD and digital sales for films decline, and it becomes tougher for them as regional players to catch Netflix's attention. I've added a link to the story, in the description below that you can read, which talks about the Australian industry and its concerns with Netflix. Fundamentally, the problem with all of these platforms is they do not care about the arts, and in fact, anything too artistic is actively harmful to them as a business, since art by nature can challenge and upset, and the last thing that a Netflix needs is to lose some subscribers because some kid was traumatized by watching a Grave of the Fireflies film or something by Gaspar Noé. Never forget that the people running these platforms are not artists themselves. They don't even come from an artistic background. They are tech business executives who wear suits, actively talk about art as content, and exclusively care about monetization numbers, not the softer benefits that come from being involved in the actual art industry, such as intellectual stimulation, discourse, education, and all the things that actual artists strive to convey. And so, with Spotify and Netflix providing ample evidence of shifting the respective art forms towards shallow, content-driven industries, you would think that some people would be a little bit more wary and circumspect about video games following suit, especially since people like to throw their arms up in the air about other content-first approaches in video games like free-to-play and DLC. But unfortunately, nope, that's not the case. All the consumers seem to be caring about right now is the cheap price and the promise of lots and lots of content via these subscription services. So here's how it's actually going to play out with Game Pass, because the way I see it, as subscription models become standardized in video games, and we do know that Sony's going to do something to follow suit when Game Pass becomes impossible to ignore, and we'll likely see Humble, Epic, or Valve do something similar on PC. This is going to become standardized, and when it does, there are going to be three major impacts, all of which are going to be ruinous to the artistic side of video games. And that's particularly a problem because video games were already on thin ice as art forms thanks to the industry's obsession with esports and live services. Firstly, games are going to get longer. Because Microsoft doesn't actually care about quality, but rather quantity, they are going to measure the success of games on their subscription service by the number of hours played. And that means they are going to incentivize hours played as the key metric for developers and publishers. So before you know it, every developer is going to be creating games for the subscription service that are going to take whatever narrative and artistic merit they may have had and try and spread it over 1,000 hours of game time. This is all in the pursuit of the tiny scraps that Microsoft will throw them now that they're unable to convince anybody to just go and buy the game up front. This is going to change how games are actually made and how developers and publishers are forced to think about the games that they make. On top of that, games are going to get safer, much, much safer. In order to get those play hours up and make sure that Microsoft is happy with the performance of the game on its Game Pass service, game developers and publishers will not be able to afford to take any risks with their game whatsoever. They are going to give players the nice, safe, comforting loops that are proven commercial successes, because every lost player from an experimental or challenging idea means lost hours of playtime off the tally for the developer or publisher. Thirdly, the rest of the industry that doesn't participate in the subscriptions will suffer too. Let's say, for argument's sake, that Microsoft gets 1 million subscribers to sign up for Game Pass, and that is a ridiculously conservative number, I know. They'll get a huge number more than that, but it is a nice round number for argument's sake and for this particular hypothetical. That 1 million consumers now have no reason to ever look beyond Game Pass, because they've already got access to their unlimited content and their huge library of content. There's 1 million fewer players as a result that will be interested in a pitch for a game that is released outside of the Game Pass environment. Given that these platform holders are also incredibly restrictive on what they allow onto their devices, it means the game developers that exist outside of the clique are going to have their business models shrunk to the point of unsustainability, and that will hit them very quickly. So, mid-tier developers are absolutely screwed when it comes to Game Pass because they can't possibly afford to offer endless content, nor are their games as superficially attractive to draw in the mainstream numbers. Previously, they were able to make a business out of selling to a niche. That niche, which will probably move to Game Pass in at least some numbers, will no longer be interested in their games because they're getting access to much bigger games, and it just becomes much harder to be interested in a niche title. That is if the mid-tier publisher is even able to get their games onto Game Pass, and if they are able to, they're able to get the game prominent enough that it actually is discoverable on Game Pass. Because again, Microsoft is incentivized to bury any game that isn't drawing in the huge numbers of players. Indies, meanwhile, will be forced to consolidate around the tiny few ideas that will allow them to compete on content. So you think you're sick of those kind of pixel roguelikes now, just wait until roguelikes are the only thing that indies can afford to produce. Those nice little 1, 2, 3, 4 hour games that told a very intense and personal story, those are dead. They're just not going to exist anymore because the market is just going to continue to shrink outside of the Game Pass space, like I said. And while you can say, yes, the indies could throw the game up on itch, I can tell you from personal experience that itch is not a place you go to make a living out of. On top of all of that, foreign developers that don't fall in line with the American mainstream can forget about finding their audience. I mean, we all know the stories about how restrictive Sony can be with certain types of content once Sony has its Game Pass, and Sony being the console that Japanese gamers still like to use, or people who like Japanese games still like to use, Sony's going to be very restrictive about what they allow onto their version of Game Pass, and it's just going to be a nightmare for any Japanese developers creating a certain type of game, which previously they could find an audience for, but they won't be able to moving forwards. So once again, don't forget that Microsoft, Sony, Valve, whoever else, they don't care about any of this. Microsoft's one and only interest is in locking people onto its platform, and the decisions that it will make will be guided exclusively by this, drawing people onto the platform, not providing them games that are artistic, not providing them with any kind of meaning in terms of the games they're playing. They just want the numbers. Microsoft will actively chase the mainstream developers, and they will actually create the rules of their platforms, including the rules around monetization, to suit what EA and Activision want, over that of what the indies will benefit the indies in the mid-tier. And of course, EA and Activision, they want to keep their prominence in the market, so they are going to help Microsoft write rules that benefit them over the mid-tier and the indies. And through all of this, everybody is going to be blocking any effort to put games on the platform that might offend or challenge subscribers. Microsoft will not allow anything to go on the platform that may cost it a subscriber. Microsoft wants a nice, safe platform where consumers mindlessly consume mindless content, and by pricing Game Pass so cheaply, that is exactly what they're getting at the moment. Now, there's nothing I can really say here to convince people to avoid Game Pass, of course. We are all hardwired to be unable to see beyond a good deal, regardless of the long-term damage that it causes. However, I do implore you that if you do care about video games as an art form, and you do want to preserve the ability for artists to work in games, then it is worth looking at the impact that subscription services have had in other fields, and considering that those precedences were set in art forms that, unlike video games, have had a long history of giving equal opportunity to artists as they have to promoted mainstream content. And consider that the one art form to date where Silicon Valley hasn't managed to dig its vile claws and ruin with subscription services has been literature. They've tried to do literature subscription services, but those have been nowhere near as successful or mainstreamed, and that is because the audience there really does care about the art first and foremost. So no, I do not believe that Game Pass is good for video games, no matter how cheap it is, and I'm being entirely honest here, I don't think you should either. That's all for this video. Thank you as always for watching. I hope it was at least a little bit thought-provoking. And do let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is a topic I do think we should be having serious discussions about. If you find my videos interesting, please do hit that like and subscribe button. And please consider throwing me $1 a month or more on Patreon. That support will help me to continue to grow what I'm doing here, and as my goal is to provide an alternate voice and line of thought in video games, I really do need that support from the grassroots, that being you, the watcher. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we will see you at the next video.